All right, welcome back, and let's continue our discussion on some of the pieces of evidence of evolution that we previously were talking about. And you left off of watching the video on the Tiktaalik, and so the Tiktaalik is just the most recent transitional fossil that we've been able to find. And there's been other examples, and you can see them here on the screen. I don't want to get too hung up on that really, but there's all kinds of transitional fossils that help us to show the evolution of sea-dwelling organisms to land-dwelling organisms over time. Right, and like I said, the Tiktaalik is just the more recent discovery. We also need to look at something called biogeography, the geographic distribution, because if Darwin's theory is actually correct, you're going to expect to find closely related yet different species living in geographic regions as they spread into nearby habitats and evolve. Yes, that is what we see. That's what the whole Galapagos Island study demonstrated. All these different finches that have different style beaks in order to be able to get to different food sources. That's biogeography. Right? So the beaks of the finches have adapted to eating a variety of different little foods. You know, a harder beak is going to help to be able to get through the harder seeds. The sharper beaks are going to help to be able to get through some of the more prickly cacti. And then some of the more pointed beaks are going to help them to be able to poke through some more of the seeds. Longer beaks are going to help them be able to get into areas where the food's a little bit more hidden, and shorter beaks are going to help them be able to get to the more readily available food more quickly. And so you guys, that's what the Galapagos finches are all about. The tortoises that he studied there as well helped to show that they've adapted similarly in different habitats, but they've spread as they've spread from the different islands that make up the Galapagos. They've all evolved separately from one another. Right, and so the length of their necks help to show that, and that goes with the type of vegetation they're eating on their particular individual island. Yes, we have a name for this. We call this divergent evolution. When things are evolving from a common ancestor and they're evolving differently from one another because of the resources within a particular environment, we call that's going to be divergent. That's also referred to as adaptive radiation. You're going to see the contrast to that, convergent evolution, here in a few moments. So if his theory is correct, once again, we're going to expect to find different species living in far apart geographic regions, but have similar habitats, becoming more likely as they adapt to those similar environments. Once again, that's exactly what we see. Great example of that is a sugar glider in Australia compared to the flying squirrel here in North America. They have evolved separately from one another, but because of the environments in which they are evolving to have very similar traits. So even though they don't have a close common ancestor, they have these very similar traits. And you guys, that's an example of something that we call convergent evolution. Whales and sharks, similar thing there. They have similar body design, but they're very different organisms. One's a fish, one's a mammal. That's an extreme difference in lineages. But they've individually adapted to have very similar characteristics because of the environment in which they live. So divergent evolution means they're evolving away from each other. Convergent evolution means they're evolving more towards each other with similar characteristics. Some other things we can look at when we're studying evidence of evolution, we can look at homologous structures. If you look at the bone structure of a human and your cats and the whales and bats, you can see they have very similar structures in terms of the fingers and the bones that make up the wings and the forelimbs. All right, so this can be traced back to an embryological origin. All right, so evolution helps explain why certain characteristics in related species have underlying similarity. We can see this. All these organisms are very different from one another, but they have many of the same characteristics, which means they have many of the same traits. All right, another one we can look at is how embryonic development occurs in the first place. So you're seeing here a picture of the egg when it first starts to develop. We'll look at that here in just a moment. We'll come back to that when we look at embryological similarities. It looks like that slide got out of place. We also can look at vestigial organs. These are homologous structures that no longer are useful for that particular organism, even though they're still present. So at one time during their evolution, they were helpful, but now they're not, but they're not harmful either, so they haven't been selected out of that particular population. the hip bones and pelvises in whales, and maybe you can see in this picture here, they still have a pelvis, even though they're not necessarily using them. Same thing in some of your boa constrictors. The appendix in humans. We were talking in class about an organism that doesn't use its back legs, and I couldn't think of the name of it. It's called a skink. We're going to come back and we're going to look at the skink legs here in just a moment as well. All right, so us as mammals, we have this little appendix, which is this little pouch that comes off from your large intestine, right, and it has bacteria, and we believe that bacteria used to be used to digest plants. All right, well, the thing is, ours is no longer functional. That's what our appendix is. There's still bacteria in there, though. That's why if your appendix ruptures, that's a bad thing, because then you get those bacteria out and some of the other fluids that are in the appendix that can cause damage to the thorax. All right, we can look at embryology. This is a picture showing the development of all these different organisms, and if you look closely, and every one of these organisms, at some point in our development, we look like all the others. So at some point you look like a fish. At some point you look like a tortoise, a chicken, a rabbit. We all go through a similar stages of embryonic development. All right, and so at some point during differentiation, you're going to start to see some differences. But same groups of undifferentiated cells develop in the same order to produce the same tissues and the organs of all vertebrates, which helps to suggest that we all come from a common ancestor. And then differentiation is what makes it so that we see different characteristics for each of the organisms. So why grow a tail and then lose it? Well, yes, you had a tail until you're about 4 weeks old, and it's pretty much gone at 8 weeks. But that's just developed into different characteristics, and we still have evidence of the tail because of your tailbone. Our pharyngeal pouches become gills in fish, and then for us it becomes part of our throats and ears. And so you get similar lineages in terms of the developmental stages when we're talking about evolution. The non-functional legs and skinks. Well, why would they still have this if they don't function? Well, look at the response here. If organisms evolved from ancestors in which that part functioned, the gene code to make that part would still be there, even if it doesn't work. So if the organ is not vital to survival, then natural selection is not necessarily going to eliminate it out. It's only going to eliminate it out when it becomes detrimental to survival. All right, this is the one that's really gotten a lot of the controversy behind evolution to go away. Molecular homologies. When we compare the DNA of organisms, and now that we have the ability to do a full sequence of a full organism and look at the similarities in terms of the structure of the DNA and the proteins that are getting made by particular organisms, we can see there's tremendous amounts of similarities between all organisms in the structures of the DNA. All right, and so this is a good example showing cytochrome C, which is an important electron carrier in the electron transport chain. And it's just showing the different amino acids that are getting translated from this particular strand of RNA, which came from DNA. And you can see there's some pretty striking similarities between all of these in terms of the actual sequence. While what makes us all different from one another is the differences in these. And the more similarities that you have here, the more similar you are in terms of ancestry to that particular organism. All right, so when we look at these molecular homologies, humans, when we compare our DNA to those of a rhesus monkey, 95% of our DNA sequences are matches to those of the monkeys. So we're coding for the same amino acids in the same particular locations on particular chromosomes. 87% related to a mouse, 69% related to a chicken. Go down to lamprey, 14%. Right? We can see this similarity in karyotypes. Remember, karyotypes are when we take a picture of the chromosomes and we map them out. This is a big one that some people don't like to see. All right, when we look at a chimpanzee versus a human, we have 46 chromosomes. They have 48 chromosomes. And if you look closely, though, we have an extra set of longer chromosomes compared to the chimps. But they have an extra set of smaller chromosomes compared to us. Well, who's to say that maybe two of these smaller ones combined, to make what is now our second chromosome. Well, how can that happen? Well, at the ends of each of your pieces of DNA, you have these things called telomeres. These are sequences that are basically there for protective purposes, so that if the DNA does get attacked, it's going to get attacked from the ends, and those ends don't actually get used for the formation of any actual proteins in your body. All right, well, what if the telomeres on those two smaller ones in the chimp broke off and it recombined as one chromosome? Then this also happened here in the middle. Now, part of the theory says that this helps to explain how we evolved from the chimpanzees and from the great apes. And that's what makes up chromosome 2. All right, last topic, and then we'll be done with today. So why do dogs and cats need to eat? Why don't we got to give our cats and dogs fresh fruit, but we got to eat it all the time? Well, they have the ability to make their own vitamin C. You don't. All right, and so if you don't eat vitamin C, you don't get enough vitamin C in your diet, you're going to get scurvy, which looks like this werewolf syndrome that you got going on down here in this picture. Well, with that, so what? Well, this is important with evolution because of the fact that we have the genes for coding for the enzymes that make vitamin C. The problem is those genes are non-functional. So, helps to show that we have a similar homology to dogs and cats. But for some reason, those particular genes don't get activated in us like they do in those other organisms. Well, there's another group of organisms that we're very related to that they don't have the ability to make their own vitamin C either. And I'm hoping at this point you can guess at the primates. All right, and then there's also these things called pseudogenes, which are basically, we talk about vestigial organs. It's a vestigial gene. They're there, but they don't actually function. You know, we have more than 99 different odor receptor genes. However, 70% of them don't work. So we have a lot of the same receptors as your dog that we know has a great sense of smell. However, our genes aren't activated to make it so that those will actually work. So once again, evidence that we have come from similar ancestors. All right, so the last thing I want you to do today is I want you to watch this Why Does Evolution Matter Now video. I think it does a good job of tying everything up. It's going to talk about the different microbes and why this evolution stuff is extremely important for us to understand when we're trying to attack some of the problems that exist as a result of microbes trying to share the world with us. So thank you guys. Have a great day. I look forward to seeing you when I get back.